Hey everyone, thank you for taking your time out to check out this video of my latest artwork. It's a time-lapse video. Before I get started, I would like to say that I don't know if I'll be talking throughout this whole video. The reality is I'll probably just jump in after this initial commentary and say what I feel like saying as it pertains to what's on screen, what I'm doing technique-wise or whatever, but wow, crazy times we're living in right now. I've been home for about a month now. That's been the choice, that's been a decision, I should say, between my wife and I to stay home for obvious reasons. But I'm not gonna really dwell on that. But I will say that being home has provided me more than enough opportunity to try to focus on my artwork and growing my YouTube channel to reflect my efforts with my artwork. I'm sure at some point there'll be other things on my YouTube channel besides artwork, but that's my goal. If people like it, great. If not, hopefully they can suggest something that they may like, and maybe I can try to work on doing something that might be entertaining for them as far as artwork's concerned. Previously in my time, I've been using ballpoint pen and white gel pen to do artwork, mainly just to sketch around. I've also been doing a few pieces with oil pastels. I like the oil pastels. I had never used them my whole life up until this point, but they were a lot of fun. Color pencils are my favorite, and so that's what I decided to focus on for my next video. Well, I'm sorry, the video you're watching now. As far as what you're seeing, I started initially with a light coat, or I should say a light hand, with the lightest shaded green that I use. It was almost like a lime green or lime yellow green, I should say. And I came back and tried to build up the values with that same color. On top of that, you will see the second green that I'm using, which is actually more of a lime green. This particular color is my favorite color. I like lime green a lot. I wanted to do, I guess, what you would call a monotone piece, where it looks like one color. Technically it's not, because I'm using 4 different color pencils, but visually it's one color, as in various shades of green. Before this, I had been doing some practice with the ballpoint pen and trying to do some cross hatching. That's not really relevant with this piece because I don't use that at all, but that's a good exercise to, at least for me, it's a good exercise to learn how to control your pressure when you're drawing. Because with ballpoint pens, they kind of gum up after a while, and if you're not careful, you see thick lines or thick dots that aren't consistent with the normal stroke of a ballpoint pen. So you have to clean it quite often, and when your pen is clean, it's a good way to practice pressure. That's obviously a different medium than what I'm using now, but I felt like that helped me be more mindful of my pressure I use to lay down these color pencils. So right now, it may look like I do, well, I don't even know, 1 to 3 passes of the same color, because I like to go as light as possible all the time, and then that way I can how can I say it, more accurately gauge the values. If I started with the heavy hand, I might have something that I don't like after I put it down on the paper. Sure, the really light hand could create more work, as you say, but it's the way I like my drawings to look, and I personally don't mind it. But yeah, it does take more time to do instead of just using a heavy hand and having, you know, more color pencils. Instead of 4 shades, you might use, I don't know, 8 shades of green, and they're all vibrant colors on the paper. That's not a problem. It's really just preference and taste at that point. But for me, what I like is the lightest hand possible, because I personally like the way the colors look when you try to do a shade from like a dark to a light. Some people go dark to light, but I prefer to go light to dark. It's helped me a lot with having real light values on parts of the artwork. Like for instance, this, from what you see right now, the midsection and parts of the legs have highlights without it being completely white. I tend not to like white highlights on my artwork. For some reason, they don't look as great as artists that I may admire who tend to pull it off. For me, I like really hard, light, I don't know how to say it, hard, light highlights, if that makes sense. Maybe I should say the only time I really like saturated white is on like metallic surfaces, but somehow people use them just straight up white highlights on parts of a figure's flesh. For me, it looks great, but when I do it, for some reason it looks not as good as I would hope. So I tend to do just the lightest shade of the color possible, and then as you'll see later in the video, I will come back with a white color pencil to kind of accentuate the lighter spots without it being just completely white. There are times where I leave things completely white because obviously I want them to be white, or like I said, the metallic surfaces, but for the most part, I don't like using the white of the paper for the highlights, if that makes sense. I still like to leave a hint of the color under the highlight, but again, that's just preference. Right here, as you can see, I'm moving on to what I would call the kimono that the elf is wearing. Kimono robe, you could call it whatever you like. But in this particular instance, since I wanted it, at least the inside of it, to be darker than the body of the elf, I started with the darker color initially than I did with the skin. There was really no need to have that yellowish green color be laid down at all, because by the time all the other colors would sit on top, with me knowing that it would be darker, all the heavy hand pressure, I should say, that I would use would cover it completely. So yeah, I omitted that color because it just wasn't necessary for this part of the artwork. And as you'll see, depending on the part of the piece that I am coloring, I may start a little differently. But this looks like I am coloring the trim part, where the outside of the robe would meet the inside. I decided to make it as bright as possible to be a contrast between the parts of the robes, between the inside and the outside. As you can see, it looks almost more yellow than green, but this is the same exact color that I used first on the figure itself. Occasionally through this piece, or this video I should say, you'll see me use the eraser because I did in the initial line work, which is the regular pencil, drafting pencil, whatever you want to call it. I like to use mechanical pencils when I draw. If anybody's curious, it's a 0.3 millimeter lead. After I did it, I realized I probably should have used the lightest color pencil for the initial line work, but to me it wasn't a big deal. I just, I'm so used to drawing everything with the pencil first and then coming back, but I need to keep that in mind sometimes when I do artwork in a particular way that I have in mind that I want the piece to look. Drawing with the pencil, just a plain pencil, may not be the best route to take, but it's not a big deal. At least to me, it isn't. This part, I am laying down the darker shade of the color on the robe after initial color that I did, which I believe it was the second shade of green, and then I'm following it up now with the third shade of green. Again, on this part of the robe, the outside, I didn't use the first shade, that more yellowy green color. I did the second green and the third green, and I try to make sure when I do something like this that there's enough contrast between the various pieces of the figure, or I should say the various elements of the artwork, as far as the body, the robe, the tree stump. I try to be mindful on what colors I want those pieces to be, so that they're not all done the same and end up visually blending together, so it just looks like one green mess, because there's not enough contrast between the pieces of the artwork. But yeah, I also try to start off, when I get to this point in the artwork where I'm coloring everything after the line art, I always start off with what I would say is my favorite piece of the artwork, or the most important, I should say. And in this case, it's the figure itself. To me, the figure is obviously more important than the robe and the tree stump that her knee is resting on. So I start with that first, and then kind of work my way to the less entertaining aspects of the piece. In this case, it was the figure, the bikini she's wearing, the robe, and then the tree stump. I'm just a big fan of starting off with a real light hand, and not a heavy hand or a hard appearance of the colors. This is the first time I've done a piece in a while that I sit and I'm like, wow, I really like the way it came out. Normally I do something, I'm like, that looks nice, Right now, I myself is probably my only real audience, so obviously I draw for myself, but of course, like many artists, you're still gonna be your worst critic. Sometimes the stuff doesn't come out the way you like, but it's still something other people may like, and they may not like it either. I mean, after you draw for a while, you tend not to second guess or overly question everything. At least in my opinion, you can do that, but for me, it's one of those things where I just focus on drawing and focus on whatever lesson I may get out of it, as far as a technique or a different approach, and try to keep that in mind in the future. But it's not something I'm gonna beat myself up over. This is the last part of the picture, drawing this tree. I saved it for last because to me it was just going to be boring, but I ended up actually enjoying drawing the tree stump more than I thought I would. It wasn't that bad. Like, I thought it was just going to be kind of lame, to be honest, but once I started, I was like, wow, this doesn't look too bad. It's not terrible. But you're always gonna have favorites as far as like parts of your artwork, or just favorite pieces in general. So when you do artwork, obviously you're gonna have favorite parts of whatever piece you may be looking at. Like, I ended up really loving the way this whole thing came out, more than I thought I would, because in my mind I was trying really hard to make it look good so that hopefully it would translate well for the video. But it turned out great. Like, I can see myself hanging this up, or somebody hanging it up if they like fantasy art. But yeah, I was very content with this. Going forward, I'm going to try to focus more on like fantasy influenced artwork, figure art that looks like fantasy art. But yeah, this is pretty much it. Again, thank you for checking out this video. I appreciate it. If you like it, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, feel free to let me know why. And yeah, I appreciate the time, and hopefully y'all look forward to seeing more of my artwork. Thanks again.